I hate to sort of start off as an economist, as a dismal scientist, but it's somewhat embarrassing to admit that the thing that economists really love about old coins is that they are a memory, a history of the trade that took place in the past, where gold coins from Byzantium show up in Yorkshire, or tells us that there were traders who were going all across these lands. Tell us about what these coins teach us about the history of the cities of the past. Tell us about what we learned from this room.
Thank you for having me. That's a wonderful question, and I believe that the layout of the gallery, in fact, with all of our best Greek coins in the center 2 cases behind you, laid out by city-state, demonstrates how much the city-state is embedded in the history of coins. Each city had its own set of denominations, so the value of the metal, gold, silver, electrum, bronze, combined with the coin's weight, and each city had its own standard. So when cities traded with one another, in fact, they had to exchange those, there was some kind of exchange rate. And it seems that, in fact, coinage was more valuable in the territory in which it had been issued by the city-state. And that's why towards sometime into the Peloponnesian Wars, about 425 BCE, Athens, which had the most valuable currency, Athens had the purest silver, was actually
reflecting sort of superpower status during the mid-5th century, right?
Right, and the imagery on Athenian coins, the head of Athena on the obverse, so that is the sort of the heads of the coin, and the owl, Athena's sacred bird, on the reverse, the tails, that really strong brand imagery was famous throughout the Mediterranean, and in fact, is found really far-flung in the Mediterranean. So we find a lot of Athenian coinage in Egypt. Egypt was very rich in grain, a commodity that Athens lacked. We see this also in Sicily, also rich in grain, a lot of Athenian coins found there. So there we see the exchange of money or coinage for commodities that were in demand.
Following a sort of classic pattern of the sort of central city, which was at the cutting edge of technology, whether it's vases or olive oil, I guess, exporting those things to the places that can supply with the primary products of grain, like Egypt and Sicily. The monopoly to mint, giving it authority. What did you worry about in terms of coins? Why, if you were a trader, why did you want the particular drachmas relative to some other currency? Were you worried about someone shaving off the edges? Were you worried about the lower quality of the silver? What were you?
So actually, many of those were factors. So Athenian silver was extremely pure, and in fact, the mines that were opened just after the Persian Wars, the mines at Laurion, had very high quality silver, and then it was also the trust, right, in the system, because of course, coinage can't work if you don't trust the political entity that's issuing it. But we do have examples, in fact, in the gallery of
more
punch
than
marks.
few monarchs who shaved off their coins over time, right?
Yes, and this was a factor, and that's why sometimes we see in the coins found in the orbit of Athens, but Egypt is an example, we see that they punched holes through the coins to verify the purity.
How did the imperial and commercial aspects of Athens coincide? How do we see that in the coins? How do we see the sort of empire working out of the coins as well as the trading side?
Well, I think to go back to the example of the imperialistic decree, it demonstrates that Athens used its position, its coinage, to assert itself with respect to trade with its allies, and then even with its foes. What's interesting is that Sparta, by contrast, a city we hear much about in ancient history, Athens' rival, didn't issue any coinage until about the 3rd century.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it?
So this also military superpower managed to get by entirely without coinage, which tells you that while Athens may have been a city of both empire and commerce, Sparta was most decidedly a city of just empire and not commerce, right?
Right.
And value was presumably stored just in land and slaves, I guess. How does the beauty of the coins interact with the value in trade? Were beautiful coins considered to be more useful in trade, or were they serving some totally different purpose?
It doesn't seem that they necessarily added any economic value. In the gallery, I always think it's interesting to think about the value of the coins now, right? Because each coin has its original value in antiquity, the value of the metal in today's market, and then its market value on the art market. And so we're operating, even in the gallery, on three different sort of levels of value. And of course, the beauty is so important for us. And clearly was important for the city-states that minted the coins, because they put effort towards the designs, which are extremely varied in the Greek period. You have images of gods, images of local heroes, images of commodities. Sometimes we see a kind of wine storage vessel called an amphora.
And why would you put an amphora on a coin?
Well, for instance, in the coinage of Chios, which is an island just off the coast of modern-day Turkey, Chios was very famous for its wine, and so it clearly was exporting large quantities. And we read about actually the wine trade in literature, and so it seems that these coins also served as advertisements, both for the ideology of the city. So we see that in Athenian coinage, but also for the commodities as well.
So what other objects do we have other than coins that are a legacy of commerce in the ancient world?
I'm so thrilled that you asked that question, because it addresses a theme that we are addressing in our gallery devoted to daily life in ancient Greece. And that gallery features all kinds of themes, but the one that will segue into the coin gallery is devoted to professions, so industry in Athens and elsewhere, and also to implements used in commerce and trade. So we have a lot of steelyard weights. So those are the counterbalances that would have hung off of a long chain. The commodity would rest in the opposing
and
scale.
why was it so important to get the weights and the steelyards exactly right? What were they doing with the
Well, you didn't want to be
steel?
cheated out of anything, did you?
Yeah.
We also have a large grain measuring block from a Greek city called Assos in the western coast of Turkey, which has cavities in it for different measurements of grain. And it's thought that that was used in the public. It was found actually in a public square in Assos. So that would have been where you bought your grain.
That's wonderful. So this sort of is the flip side of coins. So part of the beauty of coins is we have a precious metal that is standardized, and its standardization in various denominations. Its standardization makes people trust it. Makes people know that you don't have to measure it each time. You don't have to you have to count it each time.
Right.
You know what it is, and consequently you can trade swiftly.
Yes.
But there's some commodities which trade also requires you to know the measure of, and those you need to actually measure on the spot in some sense, right? And that's exactly what you're showing us here. And this is all part of the trade that cities make possible, right? That was rising. It's just such an exciting time period to think about, because it's this first period in the West where you all of a sudden have people interacting with each other on a large scale from different cultures anonymously.